All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Can, and I'm here with Linkso. And today we have Michael Cohen with an exciting talk on organic materials management in landscapes. So if you have any questions, go ahead and type in via chat, and we'll address it towards the end of the talk. Otherwise, I will turn the floor over to Michael. Welcome. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Can. Hello, I'm Michael Cohen. My position with the UC Cooperative Extension is Organic Materials Management in Agri-Food Systems. So this talk today is going to focus on organic materials management having to do with home gardeners and also landscapers, primarily focusing on what can you do to keep organics on site and see them as resources rather than something that needs to be hauled off to the dump or to a commercial composter. So I just came from a compost site right now, so it's appropriate. All right, let's get into it. And thank you for the invitation, Ken, and everyone there at Linkso. Okay. All right. So of the waste, the solid waste that are going into landfills, you can see, about half of it is materials that technically are organics that could be composted. And 7.2% as of 2018, this number varies, depending on the state and the year, but are yard trimmings, including leaves that are raked up, branches, grass clippings. And as I said, one thing, there's been a push for composting this material, and we can break it. What's the motivation for composting instead of just throwing it in a landfill? We have, one thing, of course, is just landfill space. It takes money to open up a landfill. You have to haul stuff there. But what I was getting at with my introduction was that, well, you can make a good organic soil amendment we call compost at home, and by doing this process called composting, and that implies, when I'm using the word compost, I'm talking about hot composting, which would reach a temperature where you're getting up to 131 Fahrenheit. Everything's getting exposed to that for at least 3 days, enough to kill weeds and pathogens. But, I think plenty of people do what's called cold composting at home too, where you're just adding material. It never gets to that really high temperature, but still you have this controlled breakdown of organic matter, and you're stabilizing it into something that can be put into the soil. The danger of just putting fresh organic matter into soil, like food and stuff, that you can have uncontrolled microbial activity that can kill roots and even be a substrate for pathogens in the soil if it's not stabilized. So composting implies this stabilization. What you're seeing here on the right is, I'll talk a little bit about how to put together a hot compost pile, and that's, we have these set up at Marshall Cottle Park in San Jose. The UC Cooperative Extension has a compost demonstration site, and I'm out there every Wednesday until about this time, and also every third Saturday in the morning they have a work day. So something you might want to consider. Okay, so there's just generating a compost, and then, as I said, diverting organic material from landfills. And, well, there's a landfill space to consider, but these days more and more we're conscious of the greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from landfills, and maybe are not being gathered and compressed and cleaned into compressed natural gas. When you first set up a landfill, before it's capped, there's plenty of greenhouse gas that's lost. And so instead of putting it into a landfill, you have this uncontrolled decomposition that's anaerobic without oxygen, that generates these greenhouse gases. if you do composting, you'll have substantially less greenhouse gas emissions. It's true that when you compost, yeah, a lot of that organic material, I mean, it's degrading. Microbes are using it just as we do when we use food. We oxidize it to CO2. But remember, CO2 is a relatively minor, compared to something like methane that gets released when you're in a landfill. It's much less of a greenhouse gas on a 1-to-1 ratio. That's, depending on how you calculate, 23 times more potent of a greenhouse gas methane is than CO2. So, you'll see different studies on this kind of thing, but what I've in this article was recently published, assessing climate change mitigation potential from food waste composting instead of landfilling. You see they have this estimate here, a pretty broad range of, but it's 38 to 80% lower emissions of carbon dioxide equivalents than landfilling by composting. And so what are we talking about? If you look at this graph here, methane emissions from municipal solid waste landfills is 14% of methane emissions in the United States. Others, of course, in extracting natural gas or oil, there's a lot of natural gas that comes off natural gas, being almost all methane goes into the atmosphere. Enteric fermentation, cows, and then you can just see manure management, manure pits. Okay, so recognizing this, and all this was becoming clear by the early 2000s, California responded by instituting this Senate Bill 1383, which is now just about to go into full effect. You can see, it's a stepwise process here, but the ultimate goal of SB 1383 was to reduce organics going into landfill by 75, reducing by 75% of 2014 levels, setting 2014 as a baseline. Now, some municipalities are ahead of the curve on this goal, and there's been plenty that are not, especially in Southern California. But eventually, whether it happens in 2025 or not, there will be some penalties associated with it. Right now, there's a lot of flexibility and just encouragement of instituting practices that will allow for this. And we'll talk at the end about, California has recognized, or the legislature has recognized, that it need to be more flexible or more encompassing of what counts toward credit. It was kind of, that was too limiting, and as spelled out in Senate Bill 1383. And so there's a new bill, Assembly Bill 2346, that's expanding what counts as diversion. And so we'll end with that. All right, going the wrong way here. Let me go. I'll use the manual. All right, so as much as it's good that we do have municipal composting, and there's a huge facility in this area in Santa Clara County down in Gilroy that takes most of the organic waste from the county, and food waste and yard waste, and they do composting there. In addition, they do have a good portion of food waste from San Jose goes to another facility that's a little bit north of here, where they do anaerobic digestion. They call it dry anaerobic digestion, where they do controlled production of methane, anaerobic decomposition, where they will harvest that methane and make combust it to make electricity out of it. So that's an ideal where you can actually get some of the embodied energy in the material into some usable form for society. So they're doing that, extracting some of the energy, and then they're sending that semi-stabilized food waste to the composting facility to go under full anaerobic or aerobic decomposition, doing composting. But as good as this is, as compared to landfilling, there is some trade-offs associated with doing this on a large scale. One, everyone's familiar with, I just passed by one of these trucks in San Jose, is you have to send trucks around on the road. They're, whether they're here where we might not have as many emissions problems as other municipalities from the truck fleet, but there's a noise, emissions, wear and tear on the roads, traffic that this contributes to. And so as good as it is, I think everyone would agree, ideally, if we could just deal with our compostable stuff on site, that would be best, either on site being that your actual yard, or a landscaper who's working for you, take it to a site where a central site where they have their landscape facility. And another benefit of that is, as I said, like this is a picture I took of a tour we had of that facility where compostable food waste goes. And you look at that picture there on the left and say, my goodness, a lot of that's not actually food. It's like packaging and bags. And they did an assessment there, and they found like 47% of the stuff that's going in there is not compostable, most of which is plastic, of the non-compostable stuff. And they do a good job. I mean, with mechanization, some hand sorting of getting rid of it. I mean, ideally they wouldn't have to, right? But still, some things get through and get broken down in the process, and you generate microplastics. I mean, if we zoomed in on that hand there, there's still going to be some shredded plastic that it's almost unavoidable. And that especially comes when you're dealing with the food waste compost, not as much of a problem with the yard waste compost as you might expect. And so one benefit, aside from all the other ones I just went over, that when you're composting at home, you can curate what goes in there. You can see, oh, there's some plastic, you pull that out, you throw it away. And you're much less likely you're going to have those contaminants in your compost. And yeah, so, all right, now about composting. Let me just hit OK here. There are several resources online, and you're lucky if you're interested in it. We live in a great county that encourages composting. We have a composting education program that's partially funded by the County of Santa Clara, and I just direct you to that website, and you couldn't go so far as to become a master composter. We're the only county in California that has that program, which is a combination of online and in-person training. We get great speakers for that once a week, and you get a certification at the end. There's some volunteer hours that you would do to maintain that certification. So anyone who's interested, it'd be great to have you join the program. But there's also, online resources, and to point you to Linkso, a master gardener, Leslie Moynihan, gave a talk last year right around this time, and I'd direct you to that. So I won't go over so much like how do you make a compost pile and maintain it. That's all there in the same repository where this talk is going to be, August 2023. But since I did mention it, and this is what we have primarily used at the compost demonstration site, so I show you how easy this can be. You don't have to be that much of a do-it-yourselfer to do this. You can just pick up some materials at a hardware store or the Linkso, and set up a hot composting system of your own for doing yard waste. And you can set up several of these. It's quite simple and easy to maintain. And so generally something about 4 feet high by 4 feet in diameter is good. And you'll this is one application. So if you took geometry in high school, this is one place where you'll actually be able to use pi using the formula here. So to calculate how much wire you want for a certain diameter pen, multiply by pi, 3.412. For example, if you want 4 foot diameter pen, multiply 4 feet by 3.14 to get 12.5 feet. So you get that section of hog wire, or this hardwood cloth, it's called. File off any sharp ends. Get some wood supports. Pallet slats work well for this. There's you can buy those that have been reclaimed, and just hook them up with zip ties or metal clips. Some wood eye screws here at the ends, and secure those together with just some insulated thick wire here. That works really well to keep the two ends together through the wood eye screws. And you've created a pen into which you can put your compostable materials. You can ideally you would build the pile all at once with maybe material that you've saved up. And you'll see that when you watch these composting videos or instruction that you are trying to get a proper ratio of carbon to nitrogen, the nutrients. Other nutrients you don't really, they just kind of come along for the ride. There's usually in these mixed substrates, you're gonna have enough phosphorus, you're gonna have enough potassium, and the micro elements. But this carbon nitrogen ratio, if you hit that where you want it to be, it'll go much faster. And so there are online calculators that you can plug in what proportion of materials you're putting in, and it'll tell you what the approximate carbon nitrogen ratio is. But these tables here, you can consult with them, and just kind of it is pretty forgiving. You can kind of make guesstimates and do a pretty good job of it. But here we have a master composter, Jack Carter, who's also a beekeeper in the area, putting together a pile, and kind of a porous layer of stuff that more twiggy kind of things, and then on top of that you just pile things like leaves. This is a mixture of manure and the bedding from chickens and goat farm where those are kept. And so you kind of layer these materials that they'll use the term greens for the stuff that's higher in nitrogen and the stuff browns that's higher in carbon. And so you get this ratio of about 25 carbons or 30 carbons to 1 nitrogen, and kind of mixing it as you go along, giving it a good dose of water. They say you want the compost to be sort of like a wrung out sponge, but when you're first starting it out, there's really no danger in overwatering it a little, because it's going to kind of dry on its own. So a little bit extra water in the beginning, and yeah, you let it go, and you'll see within a couple days, if you did it right, you're going to be approaching somewhere into 150 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, and then you did things right. So you let it go for a few days at that high temperature, then you mix it, and I don't have it here, but the way you would mix it is just undo the wire that holds the two ends together, open it up, just set it up, the pen right next to it, and then transfer from that pile that you just unwound, transfer them there. The sides go into the middle. You're kind of folding it inward into the pen you just set up, and there you go. You've just mixed and turned your pile, just moving it over a foot or two. Okay, very easy way to go. There are other kind of compost systems you can do at home. One is a variation on that same, instead of a cylindrical device like that you can buy some of these, some of which are like overly priced. You could build your own a square shaped one that opens. The thing about these, you can also easily cover the top to keep any animals out. Now, animals going into the compost pile, it can be a problem, especially if you're going to be including food in the pile. They recommend put the food in the closest to the center that you can, so that it heats up quickly and it becomes inedible. Another thing we do, like even here, like when I'm at home, just saving food. Myself, if you can see me here. This is a yogurt container, just living here on my own. So this can accumulate a few days of food waste, cuttings and things. And I mean, you can just leave it in here, and it kind of rots in place. And it kind of becomes inedible. just sitting around, and then you add that to your compost pile. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of anaerobic decomposition, just to make it unpalatable. There's other devices. They'll advertise these as being rat proof, but I did hear that from somebody recently that rats, if there's food in there, they will eat their way through the plastic to get at it. 3-bin system is nice. For those who got some building skills, this is a really nice one right here. And basically what people often do with this, they'll kind of build up materials in this one, and get a compost going in the second one, a full blown, with a heated compost here. And then once this has kind of reached its end of stage, where it's gone through the hot process, you've turned it several times, it's no longer getting hot after you turn it, then you have this curing bin. A nice thing about these is you can control the height by just taking these wood slats and removing them, putting them in place. So that's a really nice system. Now, on a slightly larger scale, and what I was referring to, if you're a landscaper and you are taking care of, say, condominiums, maybe, or places where people aren't going to do their own composting, or just homeowners that are not going to do it. One thing, and this is what a landscaper did, I was working with when I was living in Rohnert Park in the North Bay. He built his own compost system. So rather than taking the material from a workday and bringing it to the dump and having to pay tipping fees and the transport, just brought it to his central facility in Pengrove, and had a large 3-bin system there where they could grind material, set it up and mix it properly, water it. And they had a large 3-bin system. Now, special thing about their 3-bin system is that they had, it's called an aerobic static pile, where they didn't have to do turning. Basically, underneath this concrete slab, or embedded within it, they have these perforated pipes. And there's just a blower. It's a low power blower, basically a bouncy house blower that goes on and off a couple times an hour, and hits the pile, blows air into it to provide the oxygen it needs. So they're doing that without turning it, and get composting done efficiently that way. So yeah. Now, regardless of how you make the compost, in the end, there's this curing stage where the temperature's gone down. There's still some microbial activity. It's still a good idea to water it and keep it going for a while. Just let it stay completely stabilized. But you'll eventually have the stable, fine brown compost. And a lot of that browning, by the way, that's done by enzymes in the plant material. The same thing that happens when you cut into an apple, or when you cut into a potato tuber. You're cutting open cells and you're releasing these enzymes called these polyphenol oxidases that will take phenolic compounds, oxidize them, and those cross-link and form these brown complexes that is responsible for that color you see. So, okay, we'll talk about, what can you do with this compost? And this has been, I would say, extensively studied, different alternative ways of using it. And there are, you have to think about what's the purpose, and what I have here is 3 purposes that we'll go over. One is just the typical use of amending soil prior to planting. You can use it as a component in potting mixes, and then using it as a top dressing, like on a lawn, or as a mulch, and not actually incorporating it into the soil. And so Cornell department, the section of horticulture, did a study on many different composts that were available to them. I think it was 17, maybe 19. and just looked at things like, well, what's the effect on plant health when after incorporating in the soil and planting at different rates of incorporation? What's the effect on soil health? Does it like change its permeability to water, its ability to form agglomerates, and other things? And then, if you those things could all be good, but you also don't want to like add too much. If some composts differ in their state of maturity and have a potential to release nutrients if they're less stabilized. So all these things were taken into consideration to making some recommendation, and they came up with uh, for using compost like for planting like seedlings, for putting in seeds or trees, somewhere between 25% to 33% of the volume range to recommend incorporating. And so, friends, yeah, I know we're not really encouraging more lawns, but there's going to be some places where they're always going to be used, and so these are just examples of ways to approach it, not definitive. You'll find companies that have different ways of doing this, but this is one. Adding the compost, tilling it in 4 to 6 inch depth, raking it flat, and so you're giving when you lay down that sod or put in the seed, you're giving the roots something they can work their way into, rather than into just hard soil that you might have, depending on what you're planting into. If you have a nice loam, maybe you don't have to worry as much. Water, wait a week if possible for laying the sod or seeding. That's just a good idea. Kind of letting the microbial community there adjust to this new material. Maybe there'll be a little bit of a bloom of activity that should quickly go down, and then you have your nice amended soil. Now remember, the compost itself is not a fertilizer. It does have some nutrients in it, and you might be a good idea to also add some fertilizer at this stage. And here you're just using vegetable veg till the 10 inch depth, add 3-inch layer of compost mixed into soil, planting trees. Now, yeah, you'll get different opinions on this, but planting a deeper hole is good as long as you backfill it and make sure you get rid of the air pockets, because you don't want your tree settling below your tree crown. You don't want it to settle below the ground level and be a where water gathers. So all these recommendations are outside of field composting in general, but and as you're backfilling, just add water to make sure you're getting rid of air pockets and things are settling, and it's just a good idea to help the plant get established. Okay, so you can also use a compost. You can sometimes to if you need to get more mileage out of some planting mix that you bought, you can mix in compost to it, like a quarter or so. But you can also make up your own planting mix, and you'll see different recipes online that incorporate perlite or vermiculite and some fertilizer too. Because remember, it's not a complete fertilizer, the compost itself. Especially need to bring in some nitrogen. Now, for top dressing, after you've done a lawn aeration, where you pull out plugs using a lawn aerator, it's a good time to add some organic material back to the soil, quarter to half-inch, using an applicator like this. And composted material, especially stuff that is larger and thicker material, is especially good as a mulch compared to just saying using wood chips that have not been composted. There's a couple of reasons for that. If you do put in things and it gets too close to the tree, I mean, if there's fungal growth and water retention, you could get some fungal problems. But if you're putting in really woody material, its decay might take some nitrogen away from the top layers of the soil, because it needs the nitrogen to decay that carbon, just like we were talking about setting up a compost pile. So you're basically composting in place on. So having exposed the material to composting first, you have some of that stabilization in it, and it's not going to interfere with the soil health. So you'll see composted mulch is more highly prized for a couple of reasons, and another is these in California, we need to consider compostability of the mulches that we use. So if you're going to do chipping on site, I don't recommend these electric chippers. We've had some donated to us at the compost demonstration site, and have found it really does not handle much at all. So getting something that's sufficient power, you can find these at Home Depot, hardware stores. I don't if Linkso sells them. But getting home tripper shedder that's got sufficiently large capacity and has a chute like this where you can put big branches down, that's really what you want. And of course, if you're a landscaper, you have access, you can potentially have your own chipper that's a commercial scale. At a large facility like in Gilroy, they'll have wood chips in their compost, and they screen those out of the final compost after either before or after the curing stage. But they wind up with basically what are composted wood chips. And they sell those, and as I said, those are highly prized. Some places that are just doing chipping will do some composting on site. Here's a place that I visited recently up in the North Bay near Santa Rosa, where he's doing some composting of wood chips on site. He got a microbial community there that's primarily fungi that he's adds as an inoculum. So it's a much slower process than, because you do have a really high carbon to nitrogen ratios, and that's going to just mean it's much slower. Remember, we would like a starting composition of around 30, and this is 350 to carbons to nitrogen. So that's one reason why it takes so long. He's keeping it watered with winery wastewater. And I might have gotten some of this wrong. I took some notes, but he set up his vineyard and planting it a 3 to 5 inch layer of compost, and put in his vines. And so of course that's going to be good for holding in water. He only had to water sparingly in the summer. I think the first 2 years, forgive me if I don't have that exactly right, but by year 4 or 5, there was no irrigation, and he was getting better productivity out of these vines. They were much more vigorous than the ones that are maintained by more like conventional agriculture that did not start out with this mulching, and so they were finding water. They were able to get water out of the water table without irrigation. Okay, I mentioned this about combustibility is something to consider. This is a study that was done by the Extension at Nevada and UC Cooperative project, and comparing different types of wood chips. And one of these is composted. The others are different, mostly wood, and there is also shredded rubber added to the group. And you can see they set up these replicates and did an ignition test, and then they monitored the rate at which the fire expanded, the heat of the flame and the height of the flame. And after aging these in place for 2.5 months, and this is what they found. This is their data. So the highest of any one of these three things, flame height, for instance, shredded rubber had the highest flame height. So they just set this bar is set to 100. it had the highest temperature, and so they just set that as on the scale of 100. And so you can see shredded rubber, you get a high flame height and the maximum temperature. The rate of spread isn't as high as pine needles or the shredded western cedar, but none of these are things you would want to have around your house. And I've just noticed the place where I'm living, I mean, this is built out of concrete, but they just bought just a pallet full of shredded rubber. I'm guessing it's cheaper, but so you get this mess. But notice here on the far right, the barely any flame. It's just basically smolders and extremely low rate of spread. When you do get some heat, it smolders, and of course it's hot enough to smolder. This is the composted wood product. So that's another advantage of using composted mulch compared to a non-composted product. Okay, so some other things to consider, your own mulch is generated by leaves every year. And if you're maple trees, any trees that are deciduous trees, putting down a layer of mulch basically. And again, there's studies on these things. This is not just, of course there's folklore and but these things have been quantified. As you'd expect, you have a layer, and I think some of this is just intuitive. The leaves are going to block the sun from hitting the soil. The soil will stay at cooler temperature, less evaporation, less water loss. When it rains, you're gonna get that hard impact of the raindrops on the soil, so you're gonna get less runoff, less erosion. That decomposition of those leaves in place, it's going to add organic material. And the leaves are not just carbon, there are micronutrients in them. The plants are pretty good about taking up their nitrogen before they let the leaves drop, but there are microelements in there, and you will have nutrient cycling, feeding the microbial community. And so instead of going over this, what we see here with a blower and removing it off site or even composting it in a pile, you can just consider leaving it in place. Just maybe change the aesthetic a little bit. There was an article in the New York Times about this, and they interviewed this naturalist from the National Wildlife Federation. I think he captures a lot in just this little portion of the article, and so I'll read it. The most natural way to create a circular ecosystem in the yard is just to leave it alone, Mr. Majerski said. But that option is probably not realistic for most homeowners facing restrictions. For instance, if you have a homeowners association, this is what I mean. Maybe we need to consider, if you're on a homeowners board, talking about what should really be enforced. What kind of aesthetic are we enforcing here? This idea of clearing a landscape of the organic material for the visuals, maybe not the best idea. So the next best option is to rake leaves directly into garden beds, scatter them around roots, stems of plants up to 3 to 5 inches deep. You can also rake them into compost pile and let them decompose over the course of the year. The leaf mulch can then be applied to lawns or garden beds. You can also mulch in place by mowing over a light layer of leaves and returning to the foliage. I'll talk about that in a second. Some towns have municipal leaf compost program that recycles the leaves for residents and turns them into compost. And so this is something that law that I'm going to tell you a little bit more that's currently going through the legislature, this AB 2346, might help facilitate places where you can, more local areas where you can have a composting operation. You bring material and you come back with compost. And he closes with the most important thing to do is to try and keep them on your property. I think that fits with the theme today. Okay, about this mulching mowers. The key difference between a regular mower and a mulching mower is the blade. And what the blade, it's more curved blade. It sets up aerodynamics that allow whatever it's cutting to be cut multiple times before it's discharged And so if you're going over a lawn, it cuts things to a small enough size that it can fall between the blades of grass and basically, feed the soil there with this organic material that will decay and do all the things we've been talking about a mulch doing. And of course, there's these benefits of that we've been discussing already, reducing rate of leaf blowing, improve lawn health. Now, here's something you might not have expected, but a University of Michigan study in 2009 showed that mulched maple oaks leaves return to grass. It's a method similar to this. Actually, it had a substantial effect on broadleaf weeds. In the first year reduced it 80 some percent, the second year 53% reduction in weed emergence compared to the controls where this wasn't done. A couple tips. When there are leaves present, use the highest setting. If you get a buildup of leaves as you're moving along, just tilt the mower up a little bit to get it underneath. Don't mow wet leaves. Maybe that's obvious. And I have heard, although some people say this is still okay, but if your grass has grown very tall, it's better to use a standard mower first to bring it down, because so the mulching mowers don't work so well when the grass is high. So this is best to use for regular maintenance of a lawn where you're not letting it grow high. A couple other things that come up, branches that you have. I mean, you can, if you have fencing, let's use less plastic, for all the reasons why we might want to have plastic, including aesthetics. But there's a lot of, I found this was on LinkedIn about plastic fencing market is going to increase. To the extent you can, maybe you can build some of your own fencing with the branches that from your yard. Or here's taking this another level. There's a coming, and Ken and I took a tour that was where we got to see Bay Area redwood. Nicholas Harvey, the owner, kindly hosted us. And what they do is they take trees that, either fallen trees or trees that have been cut, like redwoods, oaks, and even eucalyptus. By the way, these stairs right here you see are made out of eucalyptus wood. And they turn this urban wood into useful products. Now, one of the difficulties, he said, is sometimes landscape architects will specify certain grades of wood, and because this is urban wood, it doesn't go through that the lumber, the large scale lumber grading system, and so they might inadvertently make it such that this perfectly good urban wood can't be used just because it doesn't have an official grade. But it's something to consider if you have a project using wood that's grown nearby. Hopefully that hasn't fallen on your house. All right. Well, I get, just before I close, just to point you to this law that it's gone through the assembly, and it's now had several readings in the Senate and some amendments. And it's, as I said, this is the one that's going to expand organic materials that can count toward what municipalities diverting organics from landfills. Now, one component of the law I should remind you, so yeah, they want to divert stuff from landfills, but what the jurisdictions also have to do is not just divert it, they have to create a market for it. They have to do something with it. And so a lot of, like, Santa Clara County's been very good about getting compost to farmers as a way to meet their requirement for what they call procurement. So what right we have, like, the vermicomposting is going to be added. Small composting operations now are going to be eligible to count it toward the law of, diverting organics, mushroom compost. These are just some highlights from the law. They're going to count mulch, and this is something on that same tour Ken and I went on. We went to a place called Eco Mulch in Martinez, and there was some frustration that even though they're diverting organics from landfills, they weren't counting mulch because it hadn't been composted. But now, if this law passes the Senate, and they're expecting it should by September, so that can count in part toward the meeting this diversion requirement, edible food recovered. Now, as I was referring to, they're also going to allow counties and municipalities to count investment that they put into community composting operations toward their required procurement targets, and equipment that go into compost mulch operations, development of compost mulch distribution sites. So hopefully, this is the law says this will be in place till 2035. So hopefully once this gets put into place, can work with UC Cooperative Extension, research conservation districts, and making something happen with this to have more local composting. Just to close, I'll point you toward the website UC Santa Clara. Before you saw the composting education subpage. Here we got organic materials management with some resources there. You can reach me, email mfscohen@ucnr.edu. And yeah, we've reached the end of the talk, and I'm happy to answer any questions the best I can.
Thanks, Michael. That was super informative. I'm glad you covered all the little spots that we stopped by too. So that's really, really enlightening there. I don't have any questions on the chat. If folks have questions for Michael, please feel free to text, chat, right in the chat, not text. And then we can address it. If not, do you have any closing remarks that you want to just sort of tell the audience? If there's one takeaway from your talk that you like for them to, have.
Well, yeah, maintaining, to close this idea of maintaining your organics at home the best you can. And that's kind of the take-home message of the talk, and finding ways to do that. I do see a question did pop up. So
Yes, it just came through. Someone's asking if there's any way to increase the temperature in their Smith Hawkins compost bin.
I don't know, so one of the things to consider, I don't know the dimensions of a Smith Hawkins compost bin. But if and are people able to jump on and actually use the speak? I'm not sure what size. Okay, well, if you're less than about 3 by 3 by 3, it's going to be hard to build up enough heat just because losing it to the surroundings. So it needs to be the compost to be a hot compost needs to have enough mass to kind of be self-insulated and retain the heat. But even then, maybe it's not building enough heat. Often the problem is that you don't have enough nitrogen in there. And so adding, if you have some access to nitrogenous waste, like ground up food waste. By the way, if you live in San Jose, there is a food bank, Loaves and Fishes, that has a food dehydrator that takes food and grinds it up while dehydrating it overnight. And that material is going to be high in nitrogen. So mixing something up that's more ground and higher in nitrogen, what chicken waste, or these kind of things, will probably do a good job of heating up your pile, making sure it's got enough water. Yeah.
All right. I do have another question. What does AB 2346 say about food takeout materials? What's compostable and what's not?
Yeah, the AB 2346 doesn't touch so much on the compostable material stuff, but there's another bill, Senate Bill 54, which was passed. And I think right now that's with Cal Recycle is trying to figure out the regulatory mechanisms that to put in place where, when something packaging says compostable, there needs to be some evidence, that there needs to be a mechanism to demonstrate that this really does break down in like a home composting system, which most compostable materials are not going to break down in a first round in a home composting system. Even, at the commercial facilities, so you put in, they will often take out things that compostable because they can't tell the difference from other plastics. But even if it goes through the composting system, they remember you saw those overs where they pull them out and then send them back in for another round to fully break down. So yeah, the Cal Recycle, which oversees these kind of things related to composting and organics management, they are working on an answer to that question.
All right.
Yeah.
That was the last question there. I
All right.
don't
Well,
have
at least
any
they had
more.
some. I appreciate people coming out, and this will be posted. So, thank you again for the
Yeah.
invitation.
No, thank you kindly for your class today. It's super informative. And can folks email you if they have further questions in the future?
Please.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks, everybody. And thank you, Michael, for being here and giving us awesome session.
Very nice. Well, thanks for the feedback, and yeah, hope to see everyone at some point in person. And see you again, Ken.
Okay, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.